We often think of history in terms of, big battles, major political events.
That's the headline moments.
Exactly. But sometimes the really revealing stories are hidden in plain sight.
Yeah.
Like, take the shopping mall.
Ah, the mall. Seems pretty straightforward, maybe.
Yeah, you think, okay, it's a place to shop, grab lunch, maybe see a movie. But the history of the American shopping mall is actually, well, it's surprisingly deep.
It really is. It's a fascinating reflection of how we've lived, how we spend our money, how our communities have sort of grown and changed.
So that's what we're going to do today. We're diving into that story.
Yeah, we'll explore the roots of this whole phenomenon, looking at everything from, how they were first imagined and built.
To their impact, right?
Right.
On society, the economy, even architecture.
Definitely. We want to go way beyond just the surface level.
Our mission, then, is to unpack those key forces, historical, societal, economic, architectural, that really shaped the mall, from its earliest ideas to what we see today.
And how it's still changing, even now.
Okay, so where do we even begin? It feels like malls just sort of sprung up sometime in the last century.
Well, it might surprise you, but the basic idea, bringing different sellers together in one spot, has really ancient roots.
Ancient? Like how ancient?
Like ancient Rome. If you look back, you see craftspeople and merchants often clustered in specific areas. You'd go to one district for pottery, another for textiles.
Huh. So like the original shopping district.
Pretty much, yeah. An early form of specialized commercial zones. And what's really interesting is, even back then, demand for certain goods would spike seasonally.
Like around holidays.
Exactly, especially around religious festivals. It's kind of like our modern holiday shopping rushes, showing that pattern isn't exactly new.
Wow.
And we even have specific examples like Trajan's Market. Early 2nd century CE, it was this complex, multi-level structure with all sorts of goods and services.
So you could, buy groceries and maybe get a haircut in the same place?
That's the idea. Nearly 2,000 years ago. A kind of proto-mall, you could say.
That's fascinating. So this idea of a central shopping hub isn't modern at all.
Not fundamentally. And, these Roman commercial districts where you could get pretty much anything you needed, it kind of foreshadows, in a way, the role malls would later play in the suburbs.
How so?
Well, the mall became this modern version, offering suburban folks a whole range of goods and services without having to trek back into the city center, a new kind of central place.
Okay, I see the connection. So from ancient Rome, what's the next big leap towards the malls we know?
The department store. That was a really pivotal development emerging in America around the mid-19th century.
Ah, right, like the big city stores?
Exactly. Stores like Stewart's in New York, they really changed how retail worked. They brought in key ideas like the one-price system.
Meaning no haggling.
Right. Big change back then.
Yeah.
Plus, focusing on turning over stock quickly and organizing everything into different departments made shopping way more straightforward.
Yeah, I can imagine. Less chaotic.
Definitely. And as we moved into the late 19th, early 20th century, these stores got bigger and bigger. And a huge part of that growth was, advertising.
Keeping the word out.
Absolutely. Stores like Hilton, Hughes & Co., they got really good at promotion, at attracting customers using these newer methods.
Okay, so we have ancient markets, then department stores.
Mm-hmm.
How do we get to the enclosed mall? The big one with everything inside.
That really brings us to Victor Gruen. He's often seen as the kind of father of the American shopping mall.
Victor Gruen, okay.
Yeah, and his own story is pretty compelling. He studied architecture in Austria, but faced a lot of restrictions, anti-Semitism. And he happily fled Austria when Germany annexed it, made his way to America.
Wow. That's quite a journey.
It really is. And once here, he did all sorts of things. Designed the General Motors exhibit for the 39 New York World's Fair. Even started a theater group on Broadway, supposedly with a little help from Albert Einstein.
You're kidding, Einstein.
That's the story. Eventually, he set up his own architecture firm and got into designing stores.
So how did store design lead to the mall concept?
Well, Gruen had this much bigger vision. It wasn't just about cramming stores together. When he designed Southdale Center in Minnesota...
That's the famous early one, right?
That's the one. Opened in '56. He planned it with this central garden court, a sidewalk cafe, newsstands. He saw it as a community hub, a kind of modern public square for the suburbs.
So more social than just commercial.
That was the ideal, yes.
Oh.
His radical idea was about creating a place, not just facilitating sales. But, that idealistic part often got well, minimize later on for profit.
How so?
That central court, that indoor public space, which is really Gruen's key innovation, later developers often shrank it down, made it smaller to fit in more shops, more leasable space.
Ah, the commercial pressures.
Yeah.
Makes sense. And this is all happening as the suburbs are booming right after the big global conflict in the 40s.
Absolutely. You had the post-war economic boom, people feeling more secure financially.
The stable future, families growing.
Right. And fewer people in the military meant a huge demand for housing. So boom, the suburbs explode, people moving out of cities in huge numbers.
Looking for that suburban dream. And the mall fits right into that.
It does. But it's crucial to remember that dream wasn't open to everyone. Discriminatory practices, especially by the Federal Housing Administration, often kept Black Americans from getting mortgages in these new suburbs.
So the early malls were serving a primarily white suburban population.
That was largely the reality, yes. The malls were designed for and located in these new suburban areas. And of course, family life was changing and cars became essential. You pretty much had to drive to get to these places.
Right, the car culture connection is huge. So thinking about those early malls, what were they like inside? What were the key design features?
Comfort and convenience were paramount. Climate control, that was a massive innovation. Being comfortable inside, no matter the weather outside, big draw.
Yeah, air conditioning must have felt like magic.
Totally. And just the variety, having all those different stores under one roof, plus that background music. Muzak, exactly. Designed to create this relaxed, sort of pleasant shopping mood.
The soundtrack to consumerism.
You could say that. They also often tried to bring a bit of the outdoors in, indoor plants, skylights for natural light, fountains.
Trying to make it feel less artificial.
Maybe. And interestingly, even though you needed a car to get there, Gruen's idea was to make the inside very pedestrian-friendly, car-free zones, like a little walking oasis surrounded by parking lots.
A self-contained downtown, almost.
That's a good way to put it. And even small things were planned, like escalators often placed to make you walk past more stores on your way up or down.
Subtle ways to encourage more browsing and buying.
Exactly. It was all pretty carefully orchestrated.
But malls became more than just places to buy things, didn't they? They turned into social hubs, too.
Oh, absolutely. Especially for teenagers. You hear the term mall rats, right?
Yeah, definitely.
That really points to how malls became these super important social spaces for young people. It was the place to meet friends, see and be seen, just hang out.
I bet mall management wasn't always thrilled about hordes of teenagers just hanging around.
You got it. There was definitely often tension there. Malls provided the space, but management also tried to, control how teens used it, their behavior.
But kids find ways.
Always. Teenagers use the mall to express their identities, carve out their social scenes, sometimes pushing against the rules or the intended design.
Like a little subculture within the mall.
Yeah.
And did the malls themselves adapt to this?
They did, especially as more and more got built. By the 1980s, you started to see retail oversaturation in some places. So to keep people coming, malls added more entertainment.
Like what?
Video arcades became huge. Multiplex movie theaters right inside the mall. They became more like all-around entertainment destinations, not just for shopping.
Shifting from pure retail to broader leisure.
Exactly. And this timing connects with the whole idea of the teenager emerging as this distinct consumer group. Magazines like 17 were catering to them.
Creating a youth market.
Right. And advertisers jumped on that. They started targeting youth culture directly, trying to co-opt it for commercial gain. Think about MTV launching in the early 80s.
Yeah. Music television.
But also a prime example of blurring lines between entertainment and advertising, aimed squarely at that youth demographic that was spending time and money, often at the mall.
It's amazing how all these threads, suburbs, youth culture, media, weave together in the mall's story. Okay, let's shift gears a bit to the business side. When did we even start calling them shopping centers?
That term actually goes back to 1947. And thinking about why they grew so much in the suburbs, tax policies might have played a role.
How so?
Well, some argue that changes in tax rules created incentives that favored building these big centers outside traditional downtowns, made it more financially appealing for developers.
Interesting. So the tax code kind of nudged development outward.
That's one perspective, yeah. There was also some architectural inspiration coming from Europe, those grand old shopping arcades.
Like in Milan, the Galleria.
Exactly like the Galleria Vittorio Emanuele II. That kind of enclosed, ornate space influenced some of the more elaborate mall designs in the 70s and 80s.
Bringing a bit of European flair to suburban America.
Sometimes, yeah. But make no mistake, mall development became a fiercely competitive business. Companies like pyramid companies were known for being really aggressive, really pushing to build and dominate markets.
Sounds pretty cutthroat.
It could be. But the whole economic picture for malls has definitely shifted, especially recently. The pandemic in 2020 really accelerated financial problems that were already brewing.
Right. Empty stores, less foot traffic.
Yeah, and issues with things like business interruption insurance during the lockdowns added another layer of difficulty for many mall owners.
It really sped up existing trends, didn't it?
Absolutely. And now you see this clear split in the market. They talk about Class A, B, and C malls.
Based on what? Quality and location.
Pretty much. And the vacancy rates, the number of empty stores, can be vastly different between those classes. Shows the sector's health is really uneven.
So some are doing okay, others are really struggling.
Exactly. And one trend we're seeing is malls trying to bring in non-retail things, like hotels built right next door or even connected, trying to diversify, bring in different kinds of visitors.
Trying to stay relevant. So that leads us to the dead mall phenomenon. How did we get from these bustling centers to empty corridors?
It was a combination of things. Even as malls grew popular, you saw sales declining in the old downtown shopping districts.
Yeah.
But the biggest recent hit has been e-commerce.
Online shopping.
Yeah, the convenience just changed the game for a lot of people. Plus, there's the whole argument about over-retailing. Just building too much retail space, too many stores for the amount of money people were actually spending. Supply outstripped demand, basically.
Or like competition.
Right, which leads to dead malls, high vacancies, few shoppers, and we're also seeing demolling.
Demolling. Taking them apart.
Sometimes, or just reconfiguring them, turning enclosed malls into, say, open-air centers or power centers with big box stores, reducing the indoor mall footprint, and yeah, overall vacancy rates have been climbing for a while.
But it's not always just abandonment, right? Are they finding new uses for these spaces?
Definitely. That's the fascinating adaptive reuse part. Old mall spaces are becoming churches, libraries, community centers, even museums.
Museums.
Yeah. Like the Spam Museum in Minnesota is famously in a former retail space that was part of a mall complex.
Wow, from Sears to Spam. That's reuse.
It is. And there was this interesting idea that malls offered a kind of pedestrian fantasy, these walkable environments. Some cities even started borrowing mall-like design features for urban areas.
Bringing the mall concept back to the city.
In a way, yeah. And we can't forget the food court. By the 80s, that was a central part of the mall experience, a real social hub.
The heart of the mall, for many people.
Totally. And behind the scenes, you had groups like the ICSC, the International Council of Shopping Centers. They work to standardize mall development, share best practices, and even lobby politically for the industry.
So a whole industry infrastructure grew up around it.
Right.
Okay, let's pivot slightly. There's another big suburban retail player, the strip mall. How does that fit in?
Right, the strip mall, it's a different beast, really.
Yeah.
Emerged distinctly after the Second World War. Usually a row of stores parking right out front, often along a main road.
Very car-oriented.
Extremely. And some early versions were called taxpayer strips.
Taxpayer strips, what does that mean?
It was kind of a placeholder development. Landowners would put up these simple, often temporary buildings to generate some income enough to pay the property taxes, the taxpayer, until the land got valuable enough for something bigger.
Ah, so not meant to be permanent necessarily.
Often not initially. And parking design evolved too, moving from street parking to those dedicated lots right in front. Architecturally, early ones often used modern styles, and signs became absolutely critical. Big, visible signs to grab attention from passing cars.
Makes sense. You need to see it from the road.
Exactly. Which leads to those ideas from architects Venturi and Scott Brown, the duck, and the decorated shed.
Okay, explain this.
A duck is a building shaped like what it sells. Think of a roadside stand shaped like a giant orange. The building is the sign.
Got it.
A decorated shed is more common for strip malls. A simple functional box of a building where all the communication, the identity, comes from the applied signage and graphics. The decoration is separate from the structure.
So the sign is more important than the building's shape.
In many roadside contexts, yes. And interestingly, even though they were often pretty basic architecturally, strip malls sometimes became default community centers.
How so?
In newer suburbs, there just weren't many other public gathering spots. So parking lots might host farmers markets, car washes, stuff like that. They filled a gap.
Kind of accidentally becoming focal points.
Yeah. And the Interstate Highway Act was huge for strip malls, too. Made roadside commerce much more accessible and widespread. But this also led to pushback. criticisms of commercial sprawl, the look of these endless roadside strips.
The visual clutter argument.
Exactly. Though some of these strips, like Colfax Avenue in Denver, have incredibly long histories and have changed a lot over time.
Okay, so we've traced the rise, and in some cases the fall or transformation of malls and strip malls, which brings up a really interesting question. Preservation. Can these places be preserved? Should they be?
That's a fantastic question, and it's complex. Trying to preserve shopping centers or strip malls as cultural resources, it's challenging.
Why is it?
Well, the main tool is the National Register of Historic Places, but its criteria often focus on high architectural style or major historical events. Many commercial buildings were built for function, maybe designed to be easily changed.
Not necessarily architectural masterpieces.
Right. And they change tenants, get facelifts frequently. So the concept of integrity, how much of the original character is left, gets tricky. For a strip mall, that might include the building, yes, but also the parking layout, the original signs.
And signs get replaced all the time.
Exactly. Plus, there's the 50-year rule. Properties usually need to be at least 50 years old. Many strip malls might be heavily altered or gone before they even hit that mark.
So the system isn't really set up for these kinds of places.
It's often a difficult fit. However, there are guidelines, the Secretary of the Interior's standards for rehabilitation, that help figure out how to reuse older buildings appropriately, even incorporating things like energy efficiency. And we are seeing creative reuse of vacant big box stores and strip mall spaces.
Like the examples we talked about, churches, libraries.
Exactly. Planners also sometimes use the idea of character areas to protect the overall feel of a commercial district, even if individual buildings aren't landmarks. Think about areas with unique roadside architecture, like the doo-wop motels in the Wildwoods, New Jersey. There have been efforts to preserve that specific visual character.
Focusing on the whole vibe, not just one building.
Right. But there's often this tension, between what's considered good taste and what has actual historical significance. Some people just see sprawl and don't think it's worth saving.
History versus aesthetics.
Kind of. And programs like the Main Street program have historically focused on traditional downtowns. But now there's more talk about retrofitting the suburbs, taking these existing commercial areas and adapting them, maybe mixing in some new urbanist ideas with adaptive reuse.
Making them more walkable, more mixed use again?
Potentially, yeah. Community involvement is key, finding out what people actually value in these spaces. And financial tools like rehabilitation tax credits can make a big difference in making preservation actually happen.
So it takes a different mindset to preserve these everyday commercial places compared to, say, a historic courthouse.
Absolutely. You have to look past just conventional beauty and see the historical narrative, the social story, the cultural footprint these places have left on how Americans live and build their communities.
So, wrapping this up, we've really gone on a journey, haven't we? From ancient Roman markets all the way to these vast, sometimes struggling commercial strips and centers of modern America. It's clear the mall, the strip mall, they're way more than just buildings with stores.
Oh, definitely. They're like mirrors reflecting these huge shifts in our history. Suburban growth, car culture, how we shop, how we socialize, consumerism itself. They've been economic powerhouses, social magnets, even stages for expressing identity.
Which leads us to a final thought for you listening. Think about those ordinary retail spaces in your own area. That strip mall you pass every day, the shopping center you go to. What stories are embedded there? What historical forces shape them? And now, as things keep changing, what's their future? Maybe there's a richer history, a more complex story right there on the roadside than we usually stop to think about.
It's worth considering. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into what turned out to be a really complex, really insightful piece of American history.